Hey guys, Gemma from ASD Rocks. Whew, it's a bit warm today. It's actually freezing, it's just warm in my car. So somehow, and I'm not really sure how, but who cares, this is how I do things, we've gotten onto the subject of autism and sexuality. Obviously, my conversation with Bo is what triggered it, but there's been a lot of discussion going on. And I found it very, very interesting how people seem to have almost separated what they would class disability as people who have rights to a fully functional, healthy sexual life, which is bizarre to me. In fact, I think you would find that regardless of physical disability, and I'm not even talking about neurological at the moment, but regardless of physical disability, a lot of people hunger. In fact, being human, we're pack animals. So being human is the very definition of wanting to mostly interact. It's actually our autistic kids that are sort of removing themselves from that, social. No, you know what? I won't say removing before anyone starts jumping up and down and going crazy. They're not finding it as easy to work within the world. I'm just going to open the windows because it's bloody hot. Of understanding human interactions, body language, all those things, those little nuances that we sort of flirting, my God, must be an alien language, because the subtle nuances required for flirting, the understanding of how to use body language, there's a whole science behind what they call micro expressions and body language, and there's a whole science to that sort of thing, and it takes people studying for years to understand it. So it's understandable to me that people on the spectrum would actually find that incredibly difficult to do. It's hard enough to have friendships, let alone work out how to flirt with someone. And it reminds me of a couple of movies. One being A Beautiful Mind, played by Russell Crowe, where he plays the schizophrenic, truly brilliant mathematician. And, he's, as with most of the people in history, interestingly enough, as with most of the people in history, we find that the more genius they have, I do this because, what is genius? But what we have deemed to be genius. Sorry, that one's going on the bloopers reel. Often, if we look back at those people in history, have either had a post-diagnosis after they've passed of being on the autism spectrum disorder side of things, or just having difficulty socially. So he goes, he's got these guys who are his friends. I wouldn't say they're his friends. They're sort of forced into a sort of relationship with him where, they're all going to the same university. They're competing for the same, not scholarship, but honors and things like that. And they're more socially aware. And so they see this gorgeous woman at the bar, and she's looking at him, at Russell Crowe. And so they sort of make a bet, how long can it be before he just completely screws it up. And he goes over to her And, you know, I mean, it doesn't really, there's not a lot of films or movies that you can see where it literally covers what's the word? I don't want to say disability, but, you know, the longing, the thirst, the need, the want for an intimate relationship, and people who are socially challenged. Let's just leave it at that. That's going to be a much easier way of saying it. And clearly over the time, he's just, you know, he's tried all these different ways. He doesn't know what works. And he walks up to this blonde woman in the bar and he says, look, can we just assume that I have said whatever it is I am supposed to say that gets us to the stage of sleeping together? You know, and of course she slaps him across the face, and, you know, that's the end of that. Not that that's helpful for him, because he still doesn't know what he's supposed to say or how he's supposed to play this game. And, you know, there are songs written about it. There's an old song from the 50s or 60s, God, called The Game of Love. Could be the 70s for all I know. You know, and it's the game of love. The amount of game playing that is involved is ridiculous. We see these subjects being touched on in series like The Big Bang Theory, series like Atypical, where he falls in love with his therapist and then ends up in a relationship with someone where he's, in Atypical, where he's continuously and constantly befuddled and confused by her reactions to things, and, you know, has to go to people and say, you know, what's she trying to say? Again, leads me on to another film, brilliant film about Alan Turing, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, where he's at school. He's fallen in love with his classmate. Alan Turing is basically, we like to say that he was the one to come up with the modern day computer. He based his ideas, of course, on someone else's idea, you know, Polish thing, but the changes, the idea of digital was his contribution, which was what made computing possible. And we still have the thing called, you know, the Turing test. And he's fallen in love. So this would be, got to be the 1930s, early 1930s, and it's a male. He's at an all boys school, and he's fallen in love, and the boy that he's fallen in love with is sitting down under a tree and teaching him about cryptography. And he says, so they're messages written down that anyone can read, but you can only understand what it says if you've got the key. And he turns around, Alan Turing turns around and looks at him and says, how is that different to everybody talking normally? Nobody says what they actually mean. Nobody, you know, and you're expected to know what they're saying, even though they're not saying what they actually mean. And it's just these, you know, none of these movies specifically are about autism. None of them are about, you know, dating and relationships. None of them are about that. What they're about are these people's lives, because they are amazing people in our history who have contributed in a phenomenal way to the way that our world has progressed. And yet the common denominator in so many of these programs and so many of these things is this consistent difficulty in trying to play the game that we have created for a relationship. Now, in the animal world, they don't exist. The alpha male would just beat the crap out of the other alpha male. And, you know, the younger ones, as they get older, have to go and find their own territory. That's just the way it is. But for some reason, you know, humans have, and I'm not going to use the word evolved when it comes to relationships, because I don't think that that's the case at all. We've created this game which is so difficult, and I can sit and talk to Bo about his sexuality and about what he's attracted to and about his want, needs and desires physically, which he feels the same as anyone else. What he doesn't seem to want, or what seems to be just too much for him, is the concept of a relationship. I find that very interesting. It doesn't mean he's not a sexual being, but I can understand how overwhelming that would be when you just have, you know, he has trouble with sarcasm. How is he going to, you know, I mean, literally, unless a girl walks up like they do in primary school, and unfortunately, you know, what's even weirder and stranger is that we as adults, who are the ones that are creating these rules of what we like to play by for the courting time, we're the very ones that are sitting at home bitching to our friends about how, oh, you know, we just don't know where we stand, because no one's just saying things straight out. It shows me what a confusing world this must be, because I'm not an academic person, but the art of being a chameleon, the art of social interaction is something that I got the grasp of very, very early on. Mostly not because of any kind of want or need for a relationship, but because neither of my parents liked who I was, and I was constantly forced to behave as a different person depending on whose house I was at. I had to be one person, and still do, if I want to be acknowledged by my father, and I have to be another person, and still do, if I want to be, you know, acknowledged is the wrong word, but, you know, accepted by my mother. I think the only person who truly genuinely loved me for who I was and didn't in any way try to change me was my grandfather. And the more I look at that guy, keeping in mind he was born in 1912, and although he did raise me, I was young, I look more and more at him and think, wow, like that guy was so on the spectrum. Just the tiniest little bits and pieces. But the only thing that he ever said to me was when I was young and I was sick, and he said, my mum rang to see how I was, because whenever I was sick, well, I was just always with him anyway. And she said, you know, how are you? And I think, you know, I mean, I was probably only 7 or 8, and I said, oh, you know, my throat hurts or something like that. And I remember my grandfather coming to me and saying afterwards, darling, when someone asks you how you are, they don't want to know. You just say fine. They're not actually asking you, how are you? I know it seems strange, I know it seems unusual, but I'm telling you, you know, when someone says, hi, how are you? It's not a genuine question. I will never forget that. Such, you know, it really... Sorry guys, that was Maya calling from my house, wondering if she can have a cookie. Yeah, that really impacted me, that someone would say, how are you? But they don't actually really want to know. So having had this life where I had to sort of change the dynamic of who I was to try and get the love that was required from each individual parent parent or person, whether it was successful or not. I really had to master that art very, very young. That helped me later on in life, in this game that we play now. But it does make me just sit and think about that for a while. I think we all should just sit and think about that for a while. What would this world look like? I've become recently a fan of two particular people, quite controversial people, and they're just, I mean, I don't know them personally, but Dr. Peterson, he's blown my philosophical world apart. And also Ben Shapiro, not for his necessarily their ideals or anything, but they both blow me away. I mean, I actually sat down to read The Subtle Art. No, what was it called? How to Make Friends and Influence People. Now, you can tell this book was written 100 years ago. Oh my goodness, and it wasn't. It was only written a couple of decades ago. But I mean, seriously, if you don't know this stuff, this is like a 101 to interacting in the world. It might be a really good manual for people on the spectrum, because it is super basic crap. I've just read it. I mean, I think I got like 3 pages into it and went, this is like reading, you know, like a comic book. This is ridiculous. So I think we need to update the How to Win Friends and Influence People, because seriously, if anything in that book is unknown to you, take a look around at your friends, because that you don't have any. There's just no way. But these two people who I've been watching recently, the way that they express themselves, the way they hold themselves, the way they manipulate conversation, they are just two incredibly intelligent individuals, and I'm in awe of what they do. I wouldn't necessarily want to do it, but I'm in awe of what they do. They really have gotten a fine art out of human psychology interaction. It's phenomenal to watch. Bo will take his time, but it gives me an insight into what I might need to do to help him on the way of this game that we're all playing, because that's, as parents, what we're supposed to do, isn't it? We're supposed to set our kids up for success and help them navigate the world that they're going to go into. So part of that is going to have to be, at some stage, there's going to have to be a courting sort of lesson going on there, and I'm going to have to sit down very hard and think about, you know, how to do that, because I have already given him the basics. He has respect. He has, you know, he's a gentleman. He'll open the door for you. He will, you know, if something's heavy, he'll carry it. You know, he's an absolute gentleman. But that's not the point. He will not get these finer nuances. He would have no clue if someone was flirting with him, and he certainly would not have a clue how to flirt with someone. And until I sit down and I say, hey, mate, listen, I got a question for you. If you like someone, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Are you going to go up to them? Are you going to smile? And what would you do? How would you start it? And I think that would be probably the first conversation that I'm going to have with him about this sort of thing. So yeah, it'll be very interesting. So ASD rocks, guys.